Hi friends, welcome back to our YouTube channel, Diverse Opals. I'm Robert, and you can see before you a number of different diamond saw blades and things relating to diamond saw blades. Sawing is a very important part of cutting and processing of opal, and the right choice of blade is very important. So I want to go through some of the different types of blades that are available in the market, blades that we also supply, but I want there to be an understanding of the applications of them and make it easier for you to choose, because normally if somebody comes to me and asks for my advice, I ask a number of questions about what they're actually using the blade for. So the first blade we're going to look at is this one here. You may have seen this type of blade. This is a continuous sintered rim blade. It's quite thin. This one here is 0.3 mil continuous rim, and the way it's manufactured is that it's one section, one segment of metal and diamond. Now, the way this is manufactured, if you can imagine a cake mix, you've got flour, you've got eggs, you've got all those components. Well, in this particular case, it's actually metal, and they're actually powdered metals, and they've got to be the right type of consistency for sawing and for wearing. And so you have these metals that are combined with diamond particles in the right ratio, and then it's fused under together and mixed, and extreme heat is applied, and ultimately we have it ground, the surface is ground, and that's you end up with this nice fine finish. Now this particular blade I would suggest is good for high speed saw. So if you have a freehand saw, I would recommend this type of blade for you, and in particular if you're going to be cutting boulder. These are available in different thicknesses. This one is just one of the thinner types that you can get, but very good for for sandstone and also for ironstone. Very good. Not so good if you've got a box saw. Box saws traditionally run slower. So what happens is with this type of blade is it starts to glaze up and doesn't cut so well. So they are the things that you need to keep in mind for this particular blade when making the right choice for cutting. Now the next blade I want to talk about is this one here. This one here is an electroplated blade. This still is diamond, looks a little bit different, and what we have around the perimeter is a coating of diamond particles. The diamond particles are just a single layer. I actually find this blade to be very good for perhaps parting or slicing. This blade is very good for parting. If you have bars in opal, you want to separate a material, this is the type of saw for you. And what I like about this particular blade is that it's a very smooth cut. It doesn't have that aggressive grab that some blades do. When you're using it, it's just a very smooth cut, and what will happen, it'll just wear out over time. There is no fresh exposure of diamond particles. The diamond particles that are there just wear out. They just get more and more worn, in contrast to the continuous sintered rim one, which will expose fresh diamond particles. This one doesn't. This one will just get slower and slower until you get to the point of where it no longer cuts. So it has its applications. I like this blade, and maybe it's the type of blade that you can use at some stage. Okay, the next blade I want to talk about is this little blade here. This is a copper blade, and it may not be for you, but there are people out there that do, once again, very fine cuts. The type of blade what I like about this blade is that it is a smooth cut also. It's different to the electroplated blade. This is a mechanically bonded blade. In other words, the copper has in fact been split all the way around the perimeter of the blade, and diamond particles have in fact been rolled into the surface. So what will happen over a period of time is that it's not much of a cutting edge, but it's ideal for very fine, delicate work. Say if you're doing some inlay work or something that requires minimal loss of material, this is a very good blade for that. Once again, I'd recommend that if you're going to use this or use a blade on your saw, I'd recommend this for a freehand saw. Yes, you can use it at a slower speed, but high speed I'd say is perhaps a better option to this. And the edge in time will just completely wear away. So once again, I think that this is a very good application, a very good blade for doing very fine work. The next blade I want to show to you is this one here. This is a German blade, as was the copper blade that I showed you previously. This is made by Diatrenn in Germany, and I've actually been involved in selling these types of blades selling and using them for over 40 years. And these were the benchmark of diamond saw blades for a very long time. Very well made, very nice cutting action. This type of blade can be used in both a freehand saw application or in a box saw application. And the actual edge is crimped a bit the same way, in the same way that the copper blade is crimped. There are slots cut all the way around the perimeter of the blade again. Diamond particles are in fact put in the edge, and a gear wheel goes round and closes those grooves up again. So you have diamond particles sitting in there. Very good for, I would say, probably more to do with white-based opal. I don't think it's going to last terribly long on harder ironstone. If you've got hard ironstone, this is not perhaps a choice for you. If it's sandy boulder, that'll be okay. But yeah, you want to choose the right blade for the right application. So very good blade, runs very well, a nice smooth blade. Now the other blade I want to show you, the last blade I'm going to show you is this one here. This is, in fact, it looks like the German blade, but it's in fact a Chinese blade. Made in the same way, and it's a cheaper alternative to the German blade. I would say, cutting wise, it's probably a little bit not quite as refined as the German blade, but has its place. So if you can't afford to buy a German blade, you would buy something like this. And once again, made in the same way, the actual edge is split, diamond particles are in there, and then it's closed shut. The diamond particles in this type of blade generally a little bit coarser and are a little bit more aggressive when it comes to cutting. Now, what I wanted to talk about with regards to diamond saw blades is the need to care for them. Now, blade care can consist in many different ways, but sharpening blades is very important, and this is a sharpening stick. This is an aluminium oxide sharpening stick. It's about a 220 grit, and what I'd recommend is that on a brand new blade, I would suggest that you make a few cuts on your saw, plenty of water, just cut it like you're cutting opal. Just make some cuts through the blade. And the purpose of that is that when the blade sometimes comes from the factory, during the crimping process around the actual perimeter of the blade, there are sometimes metal particles that just stand out and protrude above the diamond. And the purpose of using this is that it knocks off those sharp edges. The metal, which actually is not going to be doing the cutting, it's the diamond. And this actually makes it the initial cut when you start cutting the opal a little bit cleaner. You don't have the blade you don't have the blade grabbing your opal. And so if you don't have one of these, some people suggest a silicon carbide grinding wheel, a broken one, an old one. I would say nothing coarser than a 100. So 100 to 220 grits is fine. But once again, just make some cuts through the blade and it just will expose fresh diamond particles. And this I would encourage you to do through the course of your cutting. So I would say about every 10 to 15 minutes, make a cut with a broken grinding wheel or something like this. And even if you don't have a broken grinding wheel, you can use a clay brick, not a clinker brick or a hard-fired one. A clay brick, a soft clay brick is ideal as well. And this will in fact help preserve the life of your blade. Because what will happen in due course is that as your blade gets blunt, and a good test for this is that when the blade is off or on, it doesn't really matter where it is. If you grab the blade with your fingers either side like this and pull out, and you can feel what feels like a lump or some sort of a burring over this edge, it means that your blade is in a very bad state. So to avoid that happening, it's always good to keep sharpening. You're not going to reduce the life of your blade. In fact, you're going to prolong the life of your blade by doing this. So every 10, 15 minutes, if it's really hard material, you maybe should do it every 5 minutes. But I would encourage you to do this to prolong the life of your blade. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about is your flanges. Sometimes when you take your blade off, you just take your blade off and you just change it over and put your blade back on. But I want you to consider the condition of your flanges, because although these are brand new flanges and obviously the ones that would be on your saw may be a little bit dirty, it's important that this surface, both of these surfaces, because obviously they will hold your blade. This will come over to your shaft or whichever side your shaft is mounted on. Shaft and nut. And you'll do this all up and these are going to hold your blade. Now if there's any dirt on here or any corrosion, because sometimes aluminium flanges develop corrosion, what I'd recommend you do is take a piece of wet and dry paper, around about a 360, 400 grit, lay it on a flat table or a very flat surface, take your flange and put it on top of the paper and run it backwards and forwards a few times. What that's going to do is clean away any of the dirt or any of the corrosion that may be here. This is important. As I said, if you have dirt on here, when you put everything back in place, if it's not clean, your blade is going to start to wander. It's going to start to move from side to side, and you may think that the blade is in fact bent, whereas in fact it could just be some dirt on here. So keep that in mind, just keep that in mind. The other thing I wanted to talk about with flanges is that if you have made your own machine, you've made something up yourself, that's fine. A lot of people do that. But be careful of the types of flanges that you use. These are machined, so we know that the actual surfaces, everything is running in parallel. And if you've got pressed steel flanges, which are just pressed out, they can sometimes not be running true. They're okay for applications where you have silicon carbide grinding wheels in a workshop, but it's important that your blade runs true. So I'd encourage you to get some flanges, whether they be aluminium, whether they be brass, but that are actually machined, okay? Because at least that way you can be sure of your blade actually running true. Something I'd like to also talk to you about is bushes. We can understand that not all blades are going to come with the right size center for your machine, and over the years there were mainly three centers that people ordered in the way of blades, and they were 1/2 inch, 5/8 and 3/4. A lot of that's changed now, and a lot of blades that come in from overseas have 20mm centers in them. So to help accommodate the blade to suit your machine, bushes are made up, and this one's a brass one. Some are made on lathes, some are laser cut. This one has been made on a lathe. It doesn't really matter how it's made or what it's made from, preferably from metal. Plastic is not going to be durable enough or strong enough. They are reusable, so I suggest that when you've got one, you don't throw it away, look after it. And in this particular case, this is a 1/2 inch one. Quite often you can get them with different sizes. In a 20mm center, you can use a 1/2 inch or a 5/8 of an inch one. 3/4 is almost impossible to make up the allowance here, because 3/4 mil is 19.05 millimeters, and being 20mm hole, it's impossible. So just by example, the bush should not be too thick. The bush should go in the blade, and what I'm going to just quickly do is pop it in the center with a piece of masking tape so it can stay in there. So there you can see it sitting there. What I'd suggest you do is, if you're in fact doing this and you want it to stay there permanently, put the masking tape on the back, put the bush in. You can in fact leave it in there if you want to just cut the hole out and fit it on your shaft. But what I normally do is just put a little bit of Loctite thread seal around this. It's the liquid, and the liquid will actually set. So you can actually keep this in there, and you can just carefully slide it onto your shaft. You can take the tape off, and you can slide this onto the shaft and use it in that way. The other thing I just wanted to say about the bush is that make sure it's not too thick if you've got a bush available to you. What happens is that blade flanges often should have a recess in it. I don't know, what type you're using, but this recess is important because it actually accommodates that bush in there, because quite often the bush will protrude a little bit beyond the blade, and so you need that recess in there to be able to compensate for that. So that's just one other thing I wanted to say. Make sure that your bush is not too thick. Now, the other thing I just wanted to touch upon that I didn't touch upon before, and it's just coming back to me now, is about your flanges. Your blade flanges should be the correct width for your blade. If your flanges are not big enough for your blade, traditionally it used to be that your flanges were 1/3 of the diameter of your blade. Of course, you will lose your cutting, the depth of your cutting, because there's your depth of your cutting. But at least if you've got the appropriate size flange on your blade, you don't have the blade flopping around too much. And when as the blade gets bigger, you need that type of flanging to be able to hold it in place to make sure it doesn't move too much. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about with regards to blades is the lubricant. Lubricant, I would always encourage you to use water. Water is an ideal application. Some people want to use other things, but water is actually good on your hands. It's not as perhaps dangerous to the body. I guess you could say other things can be detrimental to your skin, and even if you're not wearing a mask, it can be detrimental to your lungs. So water is an appropriate application. But the other thing I wanted to talk about with the water is that, say for instance, you're using a blade like this, which is mostly this is a tin-based blade, still has elements in it that will actually in fact corrode. If you're using a box saw, and of course your box table is going to be up around here somewhere, your blade is going to be sitting in water. If you want your blade to last a lot longer, I suggest you take it out of the water at night or drain the water out of your tank. Because if you don't, what happens is that overnight, as the blade sits in water, and if in fact you're in a regional area where you might be using bore water, it can actually just corrode your blade off. And if you spent, I don't know, maybe $40 on a blade or something like that, it's an expensive loss. So I would recommend that you drain the water off. And also, if you wanted to take the added protection, spray it with some sort of a penetration or a water dispersing liquid like WD-40 or RP7 or something like that. Even turning your machine on without water will throw off sufficient water and avoid corrosion. And the other reason why I say that is that if you don't drain off all the water and one drop of water remains on here overnight, that starts to corrode. It does start to corrode. And the next time you use your blade, the first place it's going to wear is there. And before you know it, your blade will be running out of true. It'll start hammering, it'll start banging, and you'll wonder why. And it's purely because this has in fact corroded. So I would suggest you do all that you can to look after your blades, keeping them dry, keeping them free of any rust at all. And as I said, that's purely from water. Now, the other thing I just wanted to say in my closing is that when you put your blade on the machine, I recommend that you put a little bit of grease on the nut, and it might be a while before changing your blades, but a little bit of grease on the nut will go a long way to protecting it. So as you put it on, it actually makes it easier to get off the next time. And the other thing I wanted to say was, don't use too much tension, because too much tension is not necessary. All you need to do is make sure it's firm, because it's not going anywhere. It's not going to fly off. Just make sure it's firm and everything should be fine. So that's what I wanted to tell you today about diamond saw blades. I hope that this has been of interest to you and helpful. If you like it, give us a tick or a thumbs up, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.